Hello, and welcome to this episode of Book Talk. And I'm delighted to have my friend Mary Connealy with me today. As y'all know, I love her books because they always make me laugh. And they are the most delightful, I call them cowboy books, but they laugh and they have so much heart. They're the best blend of characters that pull me in, but then also just have just this great sense of humor, but also this real depth to them. And today we're going to talk about her first book in a brand new series. It's a Western light, but it's the first one is Chasing the Horizons. So, Mary, before we start talking about this book, do you want to take just a moment to introduce yourself?
Mary Connealy. I write what I call romantic comedy with cowboys, and my last book that released in October was my 75th book. So
Leave that.
So I'm coming up on 20 years doing this now. My gosh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's starting to be real, isn't it?
It is. Well, and I remember my first ACFW was when you got your first contract. And that was in 2005. And then in 2008, we both won the short book of the year. And that was so cool because I was like, oh my gosh, we're
it was like our first books together.
Yeah, in so many ways, but I'm only writing book 41. So you have far surpassed me in number of books written.
Working hard too. This is all I do. So
yeah. But it's so fun because you just when anybody gets to a point where they're like at that 75 books, I start going, how do you keep coming up with ideas? Because you're not cookie cutter. Every one of your series is very unique and different. Because you had this in just the last recent series, you had the ones where the girls were escaping from the bad stepfather and they all had these different engineering minds. And then you had the other series that I just inhaled where it was Elements of Love. And I mean, you've had all of these where they're very strong women protagonists in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s, and they all have cowboys in them, but they're all different. So how do you keep coming up with these really unique ideas for 3-book series with strong women and cowboys?
Not too much, doesn't it? This one, the one that I'm doing right now, Chasing the Horizon, that was inspired by a book I read about the first woman justice of the peace. I started researching. Wyoming was the first state to give women the right to vote in 1869, which I just thought, why? I just thought that was interesting. Because it was like 5 men to a woman. So all those rights, all those laws were passed by men. It wasn't like women activists got in there and took over. They just had men that believed in it and supported the idea. And then I read this woman justice of the peace book, and I thought, well, my heroine could be the second woman justice of the peace. How about that? So that last series was about, we call it Wyoming Sunrise. And this one that I'm doing now, I read a book called The Woman They Could Not Silence. Have you ever heard of that book?
Yeah.
You think?
Yes. Oh, because she was put into an asylum. I've seen it a couple times recently, and I've almost picked it up.
Yes, it's fascinating. It's incredibly what I would call a dense book. Like I skim a lot of books, the scene setting and the clothes, but this one is just fascinating. Every word. And this woman locked up in an insane asylum just because her husband didn't think she had a right to her own opinion. There was nothing about her that would qualify as insane, except she just irritated her husband. They had 5 children. They'd been married 20 years. It's not like he did it day one. He locked her up in this insane asylum. And when she got out, it's the best story, how she got out. I mean, it's like drama. It's like, wow. She threw a note. He was moving her because he thought the insane asylum was too nice to her. He was moving her to a worse one. And he had her locked up in the house. And she threw a note out through a boarded up window. And whoever found that note got it to a friend, and they got her out of that house. And then she had to have a trial to prove she was sane.
Oh my goodness. That's crazy.
And then she changed the world, Cara. She went out and she changed the world. She started going to legislators and governors and just, oh my gosh, she just went everywhere, traveled everywhere, and she had no money. Her husband saw the way the trial was going, and he didn't show up for court the last day. And he went home. He sold their house. He had it all done beforehand. He took their 5 children and he vanished, and he sold and got rid of all her stuff. She came home. She came home from that trial and she was homeless. Her children were gone. She is penniless.
Wow.
And she set out to change the world, to make sure this didn't happen to anyone. And she spent the rest of her life writing and speaking. And I mean, there was nothing about her that was really equipped for that, except that she just believed so passionately that something had to be done. So anyway.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that.
Very cool book. And so this is, my book starts the night my heroine's mother, with my heroine's help, escapes from an insane asylum. And then they run, and that's Chasing the Horizon. They're just running because her mother's, husband, very powerful, very ruthless, not a man who likes to be told no,
Yeah.
he's insane. He thinks she's insane because what he really thinks is she inherits a bunch of money from her very wealthy parents and she won't give it to him. They set it up so the mother and the daughter are the heirs and he can't touch it, and he wants that money. And that's why, I mean, that's different than the one,
Yeah.
the book. And so they run and they go on a wagon train. If you look at the cover, there's a wagon train on it because they're very wealthy, very,
Well, if I could get it show up.
Yeah, comfortable life, not counting the insane asylum. And so they decide if they go on a wagon train, he won't look there. This is the year the train starts. This is the year the Transcontinental Railroad opens up. So so they go across on this wagon train, and she falls in love with the handsome trail guide of the wagon train, and then she has friends who help the daughter arrange this, and they have a hiding place out west. So
I love it. And I love how the germ starts with something real, a real person, a real event, a real situation. And then that's the beauty of fiction. You take that germ and you twist it up and you add other things to it. And then you've got this perfectly new story.
Just how books are. You start with some little thing and then you're like, what if we did this and that? And of course, romance. And anyway, there was a lot of fun to write. The trouble with it is, you've done some historicals, right?
Yep.
You know a little bit about it. The wagon train. Oh my gosh, the wagon train is the most boring way to transfer yourself across the country. This is like, really, I went to Independence, Missouri, to the Western Trails Museum or whatever it's called there. And the guy there's like, it was like 90% of the people who went west on a wagon train got there.
Yeah.
It was just pretty safe. Women had babies along the way. They just almost all got there. It was hard way to get across the country, but they got there. So it's like they weren't getting attacked by Indians, and they said the main thing was cholera. Well, it's just not very interesting. So I don't know. I had a good time keeping that rolling, I told my editor, I said, if you come to a point in this book where I say, and then they rolled across Wyoming and Idaho and stopped. I said, just take it. Just like I'm going to go across 3 states with one sentence, just accept.
And 3 weeks later, they rolled into Oregon.
Their wagon wheels rumbled across Nebraska and Wyoming. So anyway, that was the hard part of writing it, because I really had fun and fun researching those insane asylums. The one thing that the mother keeps saying is, those places, they're no good for someone who's sane, but they're no good for someone who's insane either. They're just terrible places where people are just warehoused, and the orderlies and the attendants are cruel, because that's just the kind of people who are, they won't pay good wages, and they kind of attract an abusive kind of person. And so we kind of look back on her story And then there's a sort of a sub category of a woman who truly is insane, who also gets out of the asylum because the father finds out this woman has some information. So he takes her out of this insane asylum to help him find. So, I mean, I try to, you can't make jokes about mental health these days.
Yeah.
That's not a joke. So, trying to treat her with some compassion, and how can we help her too? So,
Yeah.
anyway.
No, and that's I think that's such an important element to this is, insane asylums were used so improperly for a large portion of our history where we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to use them. People
No.
were put in them inappropriately. And then people who did need help were put in them and not helped at all. And so it's just a tragic part of our history all the way around. And so there's a lot we need to learn from that, and knowing how they were used in such horrible ways so that we don't fall back into that. And
And there was really a movement right then for humane asylums. And there was a woman who did a ton of work whose name escapes me right now, which that's a shame because she did a lot of work. And there was like a magazine for insane asylums, to try to reform them. And she had a big movement. And Dorothea Dix, that was her name. And she gets kind of her, I refer to her, she's not in it, but just the work she was doing. And it's and I drew so much of it from that woman they could not silence, because she documents how she was treated in there. And it's just, anyway, so
that's there are pieces of our history that we would like to just ignore and pretend didn't happen. And that's not actually how we can learn and make sure we don't repeat those mistakes in the future. And so part of,
now that we don't, that we think, oh, that's the way to handle that. But I mean, I think of all people, homeless people, and you just think that's, I don't know. I know they emptied out insane asylums because they were so awful, like in the 60s and 70s and like that. But then what is homelessness compassion? I mean, that's terrible. But man, the solution, I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. But anyway, it's all was real interesting. And trying to remember to, try to be compassionate about it. Use some wisdom when I talk about the struggles of the mentally ill people. So anyway.
Yeah. No, and it's when you combine that with then the wagon train, and the book I'm writing right now it has a trial in it because it's a legal suspense. And I've always been like, I don't want to write a book with a trial because trials are so boring. And it's kind of the same idea of, well, a wagon train, you're just going, every day's the exact same thing, rolling.
Rolling.
Yeah. And so, and everyone's like, it's so exciting. I'm like,
no, there is no runaway wagons. There's no nothing. They just plod across. One of the things that was interesting I found out about wagon trains is one of the job one was keep rolling, because there's another one coming behind you. You can't stop. You're tired. You can't stop by a pretty lake for a few weeks and rest up. You just got to keep going, and they go no matter what. And sometimes it'd rain and be stuck in the mud for 10 days, but then just get going again. They just had to keep going. So,
oh my gosh. So when you think about this book and all the research and the subplots and the characters and everything, is there like an overarching theme that kind of came to the surface as you were writing and as you were going through the editing process, that as you look back now, you're like, okay, this ended up being like the overarching theme to the book?
oh man, I don't know. I think for me, I think it always comes back to family, that I want family to be together. But of course, in this case, the father, they're just running from him as much as they can, but the mother and the daughter. And then there's another woman that falls in with them, and they just kind of form a family because their family is so badly broken. And so I would say that's maybe it. Just like trying to form a family when the one you have is broken, and just,
Yeah. Well, and I see that in a lot of your books. That's been a theme, even from way back. I always want to say Petticoat Junction, but it was like Petticoat Canyon or something like Calico Canyon. All the way back, your books have been about how do we find family and how do we form family and how are we part of God's family? And so that's definitely an overarching theme.
Four daughters, and all I want is for them to be nearby. That's
Yeah.
all. That seems to me like their responsibility. So I got one who's in Denver, the brat. So anyway, that's all right. That's not too bad. But yeah. So when I do a book and I send a family member off, because it was very common. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, your kid would go west on a wagon train and you would never see them or hear from them again. Sometimes, I mean, sometimes a letter once every few years, but even then, not usually. So that's a personal thing for me. I just want my family around me. So I guess
Yeah.
that brings the books. So
Yeah. I always think back to like in Little House on the Prairie. And I think it's at the very beginning of Little House on the Prairie, because you've got a house in the big woods.
yeah,
And when they're leaving to
yeah,
leave Wisconsin, and it's like they're never going to see their family again. And every time I read that, I'm just like, oh, they're leaving. I mean, it's a forever thing. They're never going back to Wisconsin. And that's what it was like back then. And I think today, with all of the technology and trains, planes, and automobiles, and it's so easy.
FaceTime, and yeah, we talk to our daughter in Denver all the time, and we
Yeah.
see her too, So, oh yeah, I know it would just be like, do you remember Ma Ingalls would write letters and she'd write across and then she'd write in an angle? Do you remember she wrote
Yeah.
letters? And she just like, cause she shouldn't have much paper. I mean, it was
Yeah.
all hard to come by. And so
And it's,
she filled this paper up every square inch with writing. And
yeah. Or even
anyway,
Christmas, where there was a penny and the orange and the little tin cup. And my kids would get that in their stockings, the penny and the orange, in tribute to Little House on the Prairie. So when you think about your writing, and there's all the research that goes into it that we've talked about, and just the process of writing, and you're writing a lot. Like, you just signed another 3-book contract, which, congratulations. That means you're writing 3 books a year at least, which is a lot of writing. So what's your day look like? How are you doing that? Because you're writing very creative books, you're writing a lot of books, and they're all different and unique. So how are you churning out those kinds of books that consistently?
write 1,000 words a day. I don't have a set time for that. And you know what? That's 3 books a year, and
Yeah.
it gives me downtime. So every 70 days, I should write a 70,000 word book, right? So that's 2.5
Yeah.
months. But of course, there's more to it. There's revisions, and it's from the book that I turned in last time. You got to stop and pull through and do all this stuff, but that just about exactly keeps me busy, because I used to write a lot of novellas, and I have had to turn those down. I do not have time to write those, and I feel bad about that some, but this keeps me off the streets. I write 1,000 words a day. It's not about what time. I tend to write late at night just because I'm an insomniac, so that kind of fills in that. But not always. And when I've got editing and revision processes going on, that's more like all day long. But I don't do anything else, Cara. I just write. I should really take a walk once in a while or do something.
But
So
I think it's that consistency. You've got your rhythm and you do it and it works for you, and you've found a rhythm and a process that you can replicate, and you can replicate at a really high level. So that's fantastic. That's what it's about.
now, before I got published, I used to do 300 words a day. Somebody said that to me, write a fast
Yeah.
300 every day. But the trick there is you've got to sit down. You've got to
Yeah.
open that book document. So 300 words, I'd often write more, but I try to never write less. And it just adds up. So people who say they want to write, my advice is start writing. You can think about it and talk about it and research it, but get the words on the page. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I had somebody say, I said something about slow and steady wins the race, and they said something like being the tortoise and they were the hare, as if that the tortoise was the bad guy in that story because they were a fast writer and I was a slow writer. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm the hare, but I don't ever stop and take a nap. That's what I think.
Yeah. And you're also the multi-published author who's won a lot of awards, so it's worked. And sometimes the hair doesn't actually get done. And so that's the other thing.
Just stuck with it. What's he thinking to stop and take a nap? I mean, there's more going on than just, that's lazy. So anyway.
No, I love that. And so when you're in the process, do you ever stop and celebrate after you finished a book, or do you just kind of turn around and just get started on the next one?
You know, one of my very favorite things is that blank page, because usually I've been daydreaming the beginning of the next book a lot. So a lot of times, especially right at the beginning, I will write much faster than 1,000 words a day because I just got this opening scene. So celebrate. No, what am I supposed to do? Go out to eat? I'm doing that enough. I don't need that.
I love that. So your celebration is diving right into the next book.
Usually I try to, you really can't take, we go do things, but we're going out to see my daughter in Denver here pretty soon, but I take my computer along. I mean, those late nights, that's usually, I can still write 1,000 words a day, no matter what I'm doing. So,
yeah. No, it sounds like you've just got that rhythm that folds into your life and you can just keep on doing things and keep writing those books.
What if I can't pick it up again? I don't know. Could that possibly happen? I'm afraid. So,
yeah. Yeah, well, and if you've got the ideas and you've got the passion, then you're like, I got to keep doing this. So that's great. So as you think about the writing, it sounds like it energizes you, that you get a lot of joy and a lot of just energy from it. Is that accurate?
I think so. I think that's just, I think research is one of my very favorite things to do. So like talking about that book I read and I just, there's the research for these books is so fun that I have a hard time writing. Sometimes I need to stop it and go write the book, So that's fun for me. The research I try in the form of like a New Year's resolution, but I lapse sometimes. I try to get out and go do actual research sometimes. Like I went to that museum in Independence. I'm writing a book right now that's got the book I'm planning to write next, not this one. I want to do something with U.S. Marshals. And I just found out there's a U.S. Marshals Museum in Fort Smith, Arkansas. And so I said to my husband, can we go to this museum in Arkansas? He's like, yeah, I think we can do that. I try to do that because I do think it helps. I think it helps to get out of the house and touch things and actually read and see things. And so I'm watching a TV show right now called Bass Reeves. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
He's a Black U.S. Marshal.
Oh. And
it's really interesting, especially the setup for it was the actual, now it's rolling along show to show. And now it's just the cases he has to do. But they said they think they based the Lone Ranger on him because he would go into towns and nobody would pay attention to him because he was Black. They would just underestimate him and not take him as anything but just a wanderer. And then before you know it, some terrible person has been gone from their town and they don't even quite know where he went.
Oh, fascinating.
So, yeah, it really is. And so he's a tough guy. And so there are people who say the Lone Ranger was based on this guy because he just arrested so many people. My gosh, he'd go after these wanted men. That's what the U.S. Marshals did.
Yeah.
And, so he's an interesting character, and that's kind of piqued my interest in U.S. Marshals to begin with. So I'm trying to learn more about them because it's kind of obscure. There's not easy to find stuff about them. So,
oh, that's fascinating. And that's where those research rabbit holes just appear.
Yes. So so I've got a stack of books. I always think when I go to buy these books for research, I think, well, it's cheaper than a trip. So I just buy them and get them and hopefully get enough out of them to make the next idea, spark the next idea. So
I love it. I love it. I love all the research. It's so much fun. And when I have that stack of books for the next, novel, I'm like, okay, I've got a good idea. I've got a good start here. now I can start writing. So
Your Monuments, man, that is books. That is just such an interesting piece of history. I just love it. So, and that's
yeah,
just it's like so much fun to research. So,
yeah, the research is just so awesome. Well, and your next book is Chasing the Horizon. And I love the setup, even if there wasn't a ton happening on wagon trains, incorporating wagon trains with women who were escaping from insane asylums, who were put there by their husbands. It's just crazy to me, but it happened a lot. And so, yeah, the combination of the two. So for those who are watching and listening, Chasing the Horizons by Mary Connealy comes out in February, and highly recommend it because every book by Mary is quickly comes one of my favorites. So I know this one is going to be fantastic as well. Thanks so much for joining me today, Mary.